Thank you, Kate, and I think any number of questions I think can come from what you've said to the folks here, but since I've got the microphone, I'm going to start. I was intrigued by your woman's journey through life, and if I reflect now on a question we were talking about over lunch about insecurity and the issues that you've identified, the sorts of things that particularly for women intensifies that feeling of insecurity. From your experience to date, and given the interest that CEDA has in this about the future of work, what does innovation mean, what is technology taking us, does that amplify the insecurity question in women particularly, given, as you said, if you take the mining industry in Western Australia, most of the jobs that were retained were high-end blokes. The administrative jobs disappeared. And of course we're seeing robotics, we're seeing innovation and so on, replacing a lot of those sorts of tasks. Has any of that come out in your discussions to date?
Yeah, the main way it's come out as an opportunity for women. So I talked about systemic and attitudinal barriers, and actually another observation I've made is there are some people that no matter what they say about equality have a really deep-seated view that women should look after babies and men should go to work. And so no matter, and we call it unconscious bias, but it's not unconscious, it's conscious. And that's sort of a deeply held view. But put that to one side, the systems have tended to send women in one direction and men in another. As an opportunity, and I'm not going to get the stats right, but I heard a couple of people who were at the conference on Monday, I heard Graham Watson, who's the Vice President of the Fair Work Commission, talk about the new stevedoring business that's been set up down at WebDoc. So he talked about the old system that was incredibly blokey, had some really shocking discrimination cases. The 3% women doing it were really, suffering. The new doc is all automated. The people are hundreds of metres away from where the big machinery is. You don't have to be physically strong. And they are recruiting 50% women and more. And there's no reason. So I guess my comment on this innovation and new ways of doing things is that women are just as good at this. I know the large mining companies, and it's sort of a joke, but they always say women are better on the trucks because they're not as, vicious on them. I don't know whether they don't drive like madmen or I do not. I completely understand though, they handle the trucks differently. The trucks have a longer life. That works out to be better money, less accidents, it goes on and on. So I think there are new opportunities, but the way people think is still the old way. So my observation that I put to the mining companies in Perth is that there was no logical reason why. There was kind of this sense that 5 years ago we need lots of women. So everyone here can talk business case. I can talk business case till the cows come home. And so in the mining sector, it was really exciting 5 years ago. It was massive. We've got boom, we need millions of people. And do you know what? Women are people too. We could get women. And that isn't how they said it, but that was the driver. Well, now they are having a downturn. And I just said, you need to remember what are the other reasons why you want a diverse workforce, because your main reason has just gone away. But there was a sense, and I did put to them, there's a sense in this room that, like after the war, we've got to give the boys their jobs back while the women fall away. That isn't at all what they consciously are doing. But so I think there's new opportunities, but if it's not in the squarely in your strategic vision, then I think new industries will leave women out just like old industries did.
One more from me before we open it up to the floor. You're tied up with sport, okay? And I understand that you made a comment when you first came into this role that sport would be a great place to start the conversation around equality issues, around opportunities for females, etc. Yeah. Not just in boardrooms, but more generally. Given some of the commentary of this year from some media personalities, given the fact that we now have a women's football league and there have been questions around equality of pay and so on, How do you reflect back on some of your earlier comments on that? And are there ways in which we can advocate more strongly for better outcomes in that sense?
Yeah, fantastic. Sport is a really important place for change in terms of sexism, homophobia, racism. Part of the reason is that it's just got such a deep reach in our community. It hits kids, families, volunteers, elite, we all watch it, we play it, whatever we might do. When I started and off the Victorian, having been the Victorian Commissioner, Victoria loves its sport. All of Australia loves its sport, but Victoria particularly loves its sport. And we did some real programs that made a huge impact, and they were mostly around racism at the footy, and they were around homophobia in a whole range of sporting codes at the grassroots level. I guess if I take your question in context, I think like in the workplace, I think sport is at a real turning point on this issue, particularly including women. Again, if you want to be cynical, people have realised women have eyeballs as well, and we're watching footy and we're doing... So I think what's happened over the last 12 months, and I'll disclose that AFL's the sport I know and I'm on the board of Carlton, is that I have seen the light bulb go on for a lot of people. I've seen Gillon McLaughlin's on the male champions group that I work with, and I've seen him do some really, I would say small but incredibly impactful things. Introducing the women's team a couple of years in advance of the plan, I think has got his staff scrambling, but he did it because he knew it was the right thing to do. He refused to let the Carbine Club, an all-male club, host their special Brownlow medal event. He didn't say you have to have women, he just said if you don't have women, it's not consistent. He spoke out, I think, really well after the Eddie Maguire conversation about...
I didn't name anyone, no.
And I'm not naming anyone, but he spoke out not to chastise anyone, but to just articulate how these attitudes live in our community and how we need to be able to recognise them. Now, I think I look at, there's been lots of scandalous sexual assault and, lots of scandal in sport. I think we're seeing real progress. I don't think they've got it all right. And I think they're figuring it out as they go along. But I think that I've got sort of a real interest in that, sending such good messages to women and girls for the future. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, the opportunity, please, for you guys to put some questions here. If you have a question, hand in the air if you would. We've got some of our staff coming around with microphones. If you could identify who you are, the organisation perhaps you come from, and a question rather than entering into a debate. Thank you.
Well, I'll definitely keep to that. Kate, hi, Alison Fergus from Vic Roads. The power of the story, I think, is unquestionable, and the story that you told is the vanilla story, if you like. And I was wondering if there's any opportunity, perhaps, to that be perhaps on the Commission website, because I think there's probably a lot of power to be able to share that at different forums within organisations rather than sort of recreating, because I think it just captured so many pertinent points along the way, and people can identify with themselves or, with relations, or for men, for wives, daughters. So I'm just putting that as a potential opportunity.
Thank you very much. And I guess that's the 6 months in, that was, as I've heard this over time and just listen, every time I heard it, I started this list of the points. And I realised I got up to 25 points when women were losing out. And when I realised we live longer and that worked against us, I was like, oh, this is so bad. But this is the first time that I've really had the opportunity to sit down and put it all together. But I'm very happy to, I certainly will be talking about this and becoming more focused on what my recommendations are, particularly to government. I haven't got there yet. But I'm very happy, so either this speech or something that's really more accessible and useful, I think that's a great idea.
Always like to give everyone an opportunity. I have up the back. Thank you.
Hi, Kate. Thank you for your presentation, and I respect your optimism insofar as women are concerned. But I must say, insofar as what we as women in Victoria are faced with, by way of media representation, in particular, we've just touched upon something that I find appalling, and I'm wondering what you, as Commissioner, would recommend. What Sam Newman does on television on almost a weekly basis, and I love football, all of my little boys are involved, so I do watch the program from time to time, but really, I shouldn't have to watch it and then wonder whether or not this is at all respectful of women. Sam Newman is one. Then when I go to school with my boys, I put the radio on and I hear Maguire. And I hear even Wayne Carey admonishing Maguire, and even the president of North Melbourne chirping in and making another totally denigrating remark. You are the Commissioner. I am a lawyer. I'm utterly appalled, and I don't think women in Victoria should have to be bombarded with this and accept it, and then have someone say, oh, don't name the men. No, they need to be named, and they need to be advised or reprimanded. How would I go about that, Kate?
Fantastic. There needs to be a bigger conversation about this. I completely take your point in terms of, so one of the initiatives that people are thinking really hard about is media representation of women. So looking at this from a whole lot of women being in the media immediately changes the media story, but also how are women represented? Some of you will know there was a bit of a campaign. So who here knows what the Outer Sanctum podcast is, just out of interest? This year, the reason we all got talking about that Eddie Maguire ice bath thing was because a group of women this year decided they wanted to do a podcast to talk about football, and they felt like their voices weren't represented in the media reporting on football, and they wanted to talk about more diverse issues. They, on the Friday after the Monday, did their podcast, and they started off with, look, Collingwood's got the women's team, but I'm really struggling with that, given that this is what Eddie Maguire said, and they played the tape. And all of that became news because 6 women who weren't funded of their own initiative decided to start a podcast, and it became the biggest news. The reality is, from Monday to Friday, other than you being outraged in your car, and I'm sure lots of others, comment wasn't made by the mainstream media. So what do I think about that? It has to change. These are violent supportive attitudes that are not only bad for our girls and boys to hear, they are also the thin end of the wedge on why family violence happens and why women are not progressing. They're being treated in that way. And I guess I'm not helping you because the equal outrage, even though I don't want to say his name, in lots of ways, because a bit like some of those names, I just don't want to engage. The reality is we have to engage. This is mainstream. So we're all talking now, we're looking at Trump at the moment. So I've done a couple of interviews. It's the same conversation. What are these attitudes? Why are they dismissed as a joke? I think you should use your voice, think strategically. I also think men should use their voice, that we need more men to hold other men to account and not just wait for the women in the room to speak up. But I haven't got the answer yet, but there's absolutely... What I would say is when that incident happened, and the media just kept going, should Eddie be sacked? But actually, if you look back at what Gillan McLachlan said, he said this isn't a joke, and he explained why it's a problem and why girls will never want to go to football if they keep hearing that sort of stuff.
I have a question there, but before I get there, just to broaden that a little bit, I think the same criticism about the way in which females are portrayed by the media generally plays into that same space. Whilst in a football crazy environment that is Victoria and Melbourne particularly, that issue certainly got a lot of airtime. But if I reflect back on things that have happened in recent past, suggestions that the first female Prime Minister of Australia be put in a Hessian bag and dropped at sea, and the outrage was a bit confected by one or two people, but basically it was allowed to flow through. How do we tackle that in a broader sense?
Yeah.
Not just the rightful outrage that comes from people about football, and media people are involved in that, but more generally, how do we encourage women to suggest that they want to become the next female Prime Minister of Australia?
So this is about the attitudinal change that we're trying to bring about, because I'll give you two other places where that is happening quite a lot. One is online, so women who speak out. So some of you will know Queensland University, a group of women had a bake sale. They sold cupcakes based on if you came up and you're a white Anglo man, you had to pay $1. If you're a woman, you only had to pay 82 cents or whatever, based on the pay gap. It was really to highlight the pay gap, exactly. And it's funny, clever, memorable. But those people got death threats, threats that they would be raped, and really absolutely appalling hate online, and that is happening to women speaking out all the time. As I've gone around, particularly young women, that is part of being in the online space. The other place which I'm interested in, I'm looking at Adam Fennessy, who's in front of me, who's one of the male champions that I work with, is just workplaces. I know that group of men, when they started talking to their female staff, not about complaints, but just about their experience of work, what those men heard relentlessly, really, was the everyday sexism that women just kind of flick off at work. You know, you're ignored in a meeting, or you've got to do the coffee, or, you know, you say something that say, "Oh, you're catty today," like just over and over, emails that say, "Hi, Jensen, Jane," you know, just a constant reminder that you're different. And those men have really thought about that. The women all say, "I wouldn't complain, they didn't mean it, but I'm always been undermined in a way." So there is a group of those men who are really saying, okay, we need to find a different way to deal with this. We don't need to be punitive, but we need to stop that everyday stuff. It's all part of the same cultural attitude that says it's okay, or at least you trivialise, dismiss, justify, excuse, or even say, well, Carolyn Wilson deserves it, she speaks out, blame the victim, like all crazy. So Our Watch in particular is leading some really good work, and you'll see it in all different spots, just things to call out attitude change. And we do hear good examples. So one of the good examples I liked at the Rio Olympics was the interviewer said to Andy Murray, some of you will have heard this, you know, "Did you know you're the first tennis player to win 2 gold medals?" And he said, "Oh, I think Serena and Venus have both won 4. So there's constant, and I always say about this inequality, once you've seen, it's like a magic eye picture, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, and suddenly you notice everywhere. So I hope everyone leaves with just a little bit more thinking about that.
Thank you.
Hello, thanks very much, Kate. I'm Angela Emsley from Hester Super Fund, and you've talked quite a lot today about retirement security for women, and that's something that's pretty dear to our heart because we have over 800,000 members. 84% of them are women, most of them working in traditional female occupations. And earlier in the year we had a Senate inquiry, as I'm sure you know, into the retirement gap, and everybody came out and talked about what a great problem it was, and then nothing happened. All we had was we kept the LISC, or the Low Income Super Scheme, under a different name, and then nothing happened. Is this something that's a trend that everybody wants to be associated with talking about this issue, but then nothing happens? Be interested in your observations.
And recognising I've come from corporate to state government to federal government, so I'm only learning about how nothing happens, now. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but sort of some of the corporate world, if you want it to happen, you can, which doesn't mean they're perfect at anything. So I haven't got my strong view on who I would work on about that issue, but one thing I know, I think the superannuation kind of question is beginning to hit with some organisations. So you would know there's a few organisations, I think ANZ's amongst them, who have started making higher contributions for women and also contributions on their maternity, their unpaid periods, to recognise this gap. But in terms of that taxation, superannuation, the politics around that, I'm really just warming up on that, I guess.
Thank you. Somewhere in this direction, at the front. Thank you.
You're on.
Hi, Kate and Stephen. Thanks very much. Justine Vesutis from Monash University. Kate, I really liked the point you made about having to make change in the different environments that women operate in work and life and play. As employers, how can we influence environments outside of the workplace to influence change?
Yeah, that's great. I'm really interested in that. So the particular male champions group I brought together, I really brought together partly because I knew their reach into the community. So when I started work with Victoria Police, for example, everyone used to say, why is the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission working so close with Victoria Police? Well, firstly, they're at that point in time, and they still have a leader who was really committed to diversity, which was Ken Lay. But the second was, look, we are 80 people with a small funding. There's 17,000 of them. They're all over the state, and they're talking to community every day. So if they get better at gender equality, then that's gonna filter out. In that group, to go to that other point, we have the editor of the Herald Sun, and he is there not as an employer, he is there because we want to call to account what he puts in, but he is really keen to put in stories that change the picture. So each of them, Australia Post, people go in, NAB, so each of them, I've really put to them both, what are you doing for your staff, but also what are you projecting out to the world? How can you influence change? And they're still coming up with some great ideas. I can't say, but I think Australia Post is about to do something fantastic. Medibank is in that group, and some of you might remember the fantastic ads that they did last year. Now, Medibank, just for you to know, is, I think, of the ASX 200, anyway, it has a gender balance board. And so every time they do something good, I go, see. But they did an amazing campaign of advertising which it said healthcare for every family, and it just represented people with disability, Aboriginal people, same-sex partners. So we do, with the organisations I'm working with, the banks, for example, are starting to look at externally helping clients and customers with financial literacy education, particularly targeting women experiencing family violence. So my view is that internally is important, but externally has even more impact. So if you want to see a resource, the broader male champions of change have done a paper called Change the Story, I think it's called. And it shows if you want to be a beginner organisation, here's what you can do on domestic violence, for example. If you want to be the next step along, here's what you can do. And if you want to be at the top, it's think about your impact in the community.
I have time for one final, whoever's got the microphone here. Thank you.
Hi Kate, my name's Clodagh Smith from ACOM. I'm a mother of 2 little kids, and my husband is very keen to be involved with them, especially when they were a lot younger. It was easy for me to work part-time for work, and work has been fantastic for me, but he kept hitting hurdles that people were, you can't go down 4 days a week, don't you think about your career, all that sort of stuff. So I'm wondering, sort of my view is to help free up women, do we also need to free up men to be able to step up to those roles? Do you have any...
I have a very strong view, you're dead right, absolutely. So discrimination doesn't just affect women. There's attitudes, violence supportive attitudes, but there's this very stereotypical attitude about women as carers and men as workers. And Australia, I haven't worked out why, but Australia's clung to that a lot more than a lot of other countries. So when we get expats, they kind of come here and go, why does someone else decide who's going to look after your child? Like I had a baby and they basically said, well, you're the mum, you're staying home, you're the dad off to work. There is no question. So 1 in 4 men who take on parenting responsibilities experience discrimination. And my observation is they're breaking the stereotype as well. And so that attitudes, I do think it's even harder so women get flexible work. It's kind of, they don't progress. So my push on that is great, you're giving it, but you're not helping them up the chain. Men can't even get it. And if they get it, it's like, you know, that's 10 times worse. At least a woman's looking after a child, but what are you doing, you know, looking after a child? But so I agree. It's very difficult for men, and that needs to change. And men both want to be parents and carers as well. And it is absolutely so important to help women get back in so that all of the economics that I described would completely be rectified. So yeah, your point is right.
I have to apologise to those other folks that wanted to ask a question, but unfortunately time has beaten us. Could I invite, please, Jennifer Boulding, the Chief Executive Officer of Program Professionals, to propose the formal vote of thanks. Thanks, Jennifer.